Han, she was hiding her face between her both knees, crying her heart out. They bullied her again and made a lot of fun of her because of her dangerous mafia boyfriend Jungkook. Although they all were scared of him but still made fun of her anyway. Her hands trembled when the door of her classroom opened and her teacher entered. Maya looked up from her knees as her teacher sat on the chair by her desk. The teacher asked. The teacher smiled softly. Vian shook her head. Vian whispered. Teacher frowned. She asked again, making Vian shake her head. Vian bit her lip. Her teacher always did this whenever Vian was sad. Teacher said, smiling warmly. Vian sighed, tears streaming down her face. She was really grateful to her teacher for always trying to make her smile again. Vian whispered. She smiled at Vian before heading out of the room. Vian nodded with a smile and sighed. She murmured. Vian didn't want him to find out about her problems so that he would get angry with her, and at the same time, she also wanted to hide them as much as possible. She knew they weren't very good for her reputation. Jungkook shouted. Vian stood frozen in place. Vian has never seen Jungkook like this. Usually he was more gentle in front of her, but now he was losing his cool. She was trembling in fear. What if he finds out and does the same to her? She was standing in the doorway about to enter the mansion after a hectic day. Jungkook's gaze turned to her and he smiled a little, making her heave a deep breath. He walked towards her slowly. When he reached her, he cupped her cheeks with his hands. Her eyes fluttered close as his thumb pressed her cheeks soothingly. He leaned down and pressed his lips against hers softly and sweetly. Ryan hummed softly into his lips. He pulled away and brushed the tears from her cheeks tenderly while saying, he asked worriedly. Ryan sniffled and nodded. Junko smiled sadly and pulled her closer. He said. Ryan shook her head with a small smile. Junko blinked once. His eyes seemed soft and understanding. His expression softened and he pressed his forehead against hers. He kissed her forehead, causing her to sigh deeply. He said. Ryan nodded and headed upstairs to take a quick shower. Vi and Junko were having dinner peacefully, but she wasn't touching her food, which made Junko frown and confused. Vi didn't want to worry him to make him sad. He asked, and Vian just nodded quietly. Jungkook narrowed his eyes. Vian shook her head and sighed. Jungkook sighed frustratedly and grabbed her plate of food. He snapped. She said as her eyes welled up with tears. He pleaded with her, trying not to raise his voice. Ryan just looked away. Ryan didn't move. Jungkook grabbed her chain, making her look at him. Their gazes clashed. Jungkook could see hurt in her eyes, and he felt guilty for getting too mad. He hated it. He had to be patient with her, for himself as well. He sat quietly, wine gloved, and started to speaking. Jungkook listened attentively. She blurted out. Jungkook froze and stared at Ryan as she stared back at him. Neither spoke for a few seconds until Jungkook broke the silence by laughing. He asked, still chuckling. Ryan looked at him with those eyes, which was telling him yes, he heard right, she kissed someone. His expression changed into rage. He didn't rush to ask her anything else. He threw the plate away. She jumped slightly surprised. He yelled. He looked furious. Ryan flinched back. Ryan didn't say anything. Tears were already falling down uncontrollably from her eyes. Ryan sobbed harder, covering her mouth. Jacob was getting angrier. He slammed the table. She flinched again and he grabbed his hair in frustration. He couldn't believe was happening. It was all of unfair and sudden. Ryan was shaking in silent sobs. Ryan was still staring at him with those wide eyes of fears. He ordered, pointing at the door. Before she could finish her sentence, Junko held her arm harshly and pushed her out of the house with full force. He spat and closed the door behind him and stormed inside. The only thing left inside the kitchen were dishes and broken plate and broken glass. Walking on the footpath, Ryan was crying in mess. Vine screamed at herself. Vine sobbed. Vine continued sobbing loudly. She wiped her tear away angrily. She cursed herself. She should have been honest with Jungkook. She should have told him everything. She shouldn't have kept any secret from him at all. Suddenly, a black car stopped in front of her, and two men in black suits come out of the car. One of them smirked and sprayed on Vian's face before dragging her into the car along with them. Jungkook rubbed his face with his palms and sighed deeply. He wiped off his tear and looked at the picture of Vian which was on the nightstand. He flinched when his phone rang, making him attend the call. Miss Lee said over the phone, making Jungkook's world crash. His heartbeat increased with the thought of Vian. She was alone at this time. She must be terrified. Jungkook yelled in frustration and ran out of the house quickly to find Vian. Jungkook was driving furiously, looking here and there for Vian. His heart wasn't at peace. He just wanted his Vian at any cost. His phone started ringing again, so he answered it, and his blood intensely boiled when he heard his voice. Min Jong chuckled evilly through his phone. Listening him, Jungkook understood that Vian was with him. He felt anger rising up inside of him as he gripped tightly on the steering wheel. Jungkook gritted his teeth and clenched his fist, killing his grip on the steering wheel. Jungkook sat darkly through gritting his teeth as he got out of the car, as Min mentioned. Jungkook smirked. Min looked at Vian, who was tied in a rope on the chair. He smirked at Vian's terrifying figure. Min said, holding his knife in front of Vian's face. She trembled. She thought desperately. He shouted through gritted teeth as he stepped forward. Min smiled evilly, making Vian's heart drop. The words left Jungkook's lips. Jungkook pointed his gun on Min. Min scoffed. He knew he wouldn't hesitate but tried to play it cool. She cried out in panic. He warned. Min chuckled evilly. Jungkook threatened. Min's eyes wide in shock. He never thought about it. He thought violence as his weakness, but she was his power. Jungkook smirked, keeping his step forward. Jungkook grinned evilly and looked at Vian with his cold gaze. She gulped, not knowing how to respond to it. He sat and signaled his men to set her free. As she got free, she immediately ran to Jungkook and hid herself in his arms. He embraced her and held into her tightly. He buried his head in her shoulder and whispered soothing words to calm herself down. When they finished their hug, Vian pulled away and looked into Jungkook's eyes. He sat softly and intertwined their fingers. They walked quietly. He stopped and looked back at Min, who was terrified. Jungkook smirked and left with Vian. Jungkook treated her once quietly without taking a glance at her. He was ashamed of his behavior towards her. He regretted saying what he said. He hated himself for doing that to Ryan, for hurting her like that. He couldn't even imagine the pain that she had been feeling. He asked her softly while kissing her side of the head. Ryan nodded silently, feeling guilty that she put Jungkook into such danger for herself. Jungkook didn't say anything. He let her talk freely. Tears started streaming down Jungkook's cheeks. Jungkook looked down and shook his head lightly. He wanted her to understand that no matter what happened between them, it doesn't change the fact that he loved her very much. He wanted her to realize that not only she is his precious girl, but he would take the risk to protect her. Jungkook sobbed and hugged her tightly and let his tear fall on her skin. She patted him on his back gently. He whispered in her ear and held her closer to him. Ryan caressed his hair softly. Ryan continued talking as tears still flowed down her cheeks. Jungkook slowly calmed down and kissed her forehead. He sighed and looked at Ryan lovingly. He loved that she cared about him. She was too touched that she forgave him. He said softly and cupped her cheeks tenderly. She breathed out before kissing him sweetly, letting go. Jungkook smiled widely at that and leaned to kiss her again.